WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It is officially baseball season around here at Pitchers and Catchers Reporting. And it always is good to catch up with this guy. He was always one of my favorites as a kid growing up. He is now into semi-retirement and working heartily on his golf game. Former Yankees broadcaster, but always number one in the Orioles program and number one in the leadoff position early in his career around here. We welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Ken Singleton back on. And, man, what are you going to do with all these spring and summer nights, Singy? I bet you're out there doing something good with cool kids or whatnot, but what's this all retirement? You don't know anything about retirement, man. Come on.
You're absolutely right, Nestor. I'm down in Florida right now. We have a home down here. This is a good time of year to be down in Florida. Actually, my boss talked me to coming back and doing some games this year. So I'm not completely retired, but
See,
I'm not.
I knew it. I predicted it was like Sugar Ray when you're Muhammad Ali when they tried Rocky. I mean, how many times did Rocky try to hang it up, man?
Yeah, well, I was all prepared to do so, but about last July he called me and says, "Well, you got to come back." And I said to Mr. Filippelli, who was the executive producer, "Yes." I said, "I've already told everybody I'm not coming back," and he said, "Well, we can fix that." And actually, he gave me a schedule that was so good that, and I'm not doing as many games.
All right.
That I couldn't say no. And so I'll be back. I'll be doing about 25 games this year.
Okay. Well, so that's a nice little limited menu for you, and it keeps you active in all of it. And certainly, there's something about doing it with the Yankees, right? I mean, you're doing it where you know the games that are on your schedule in August and September are going to have some value. There's no doubt about that.
There's no doubt about it. This will be my 23rd year with the Yankees. And, boy, that kind of flew by. But the thing about
I still think of you as an Orioles, Singy.
Yeah, I do too. There were some great years in Baltimore. But 23 years of doing Yankee games, and believe it or not, the previous 22 they had a winning record every single year. So it has been fun. It's been a fun team to cover. Well,
I mean, that's one of the things that sucks you back in is that you want to be there when they win again, right? I mean, you want to experience part of that. And look, there's lots gone down. And, I reached you, I think, a month ago, and you were golfing and whatever. I said, don't worry, there was plenty going on. And in that time, Messina has gone into the Hall of Fame. We've lost Frank Robinson. I mean, it has been... There's been a massive baseball story every week, including the designated hitter and where Machado and Bryce Harper and these guys. So I want to pick them one by one. Let's start with Frank, right? I mean, to some degree you walked in that shadow a little bit, right, when you came in here? A little bit, right?
Well, Frank, Frank is one of the all-time greatest players. We all know that. We all know when he came to Baltimore, the Orioles were a pretty good team, but he's the one who kind of put them over the top. He goes out there the first year, wins the MVP, wins the Triple Crown, leads them to a world championship. And I think in that regard, he cemented his relationship with the city of Baltimore forever. So, and then, of course, he goes on to, become the first African-American manager. So not only is he a great player, but he's a great historical figure in the game of baseball, and there's a good reason why he's in the Hall of Fame.
Well, there was that point where you came over from the National League, right? You put on the Orioles sweater, and Frank's just his career's winding down, managing. So you got a taste of that, right? When you came,
guys like him and Don Baylor, who was sort of like a protege of Frank Robinson.
Sure.
He was sort of like the second coming of Frank Robinson on the Orioles. Maybe not as great a player as Frank, but Baylor was good enough to be an MVP himself one year. So
and you built another thing here, but part of that thing was built without Frank. There's nothing, right? I mean, that was the tipping point for everything that the Orioles ever were, and. Over the weekend, seeing all these stories that were written by sports writers, stories from players like yourself, as well as Brooks and the guys that played with him, it really does sort of span the generations, seeing the 83 championship team with you a couple of months ago for what 66 represented, and all the tentacles of how Brooks and Jim then became part of what you were, and Don Baylor became part of what you. You know, that there really was a synergy for all of it, and the connectivity of the Ripkens in the Oriole way that started with Frank.
Yeah, I would say that when they got it done in '66, it kind of set the tone for the next 15 to 20 years. The Orioles were maybe, I believe so, the winningest team. You know, they had 13 years in a row where they had at least one pitcher win 20 games. They just seemed to be a model franchise, and it all started when they made that trade and got Frank Robinson over from the Cincinnati Reds.
Ken Singleton is our guest. You can, of course, find him 25 times, not too much. If you see a figure cutting a golf cart path somewhere in North Baltimore, it's probably Ken. So say hello to him and get that done. Messina, we've waited a while on him. I've put my calls into Cooperstown. I've always felt he's a Hall of Famer. I felt Schilling's a Hall of Famer. Maybe one day he'll get in, maybe he won't. I don't have a ballot at this point, and there's a lot of mystery about how all of this happens. But in the case of Messina, what hat he would wear, whether he be an Oriole, whether he be a Yankee, I've never doubted that he was a Hall of Famer, but not getting the ring, the 20 wins, all of those little benchmarks around him. But he is the most unique Oriole in a lot of ways because he did go play for the Yankees, and it is sort of a 50-50 split for him in his career.
It is. I think he chose to go in without a logo on his hat, which it tells you that he had split allegiances there, and rightly so. To me, when you become a Hall of Fame pitcher, I know that there are several pitchers out there that are in the Hall of Fame pitch for a few different teams. But when you have that certain quality to you as a pitcher, your original team should not let you go. That's the way you should become, like a Jim Palmer, somebody who spent his whole career with the Orioles. I know that Messina signed for big time money with the Yankees. But to me, in speaking to him, I don't know how hard the Orioles tried to keep him, but knowing that he would leave and knowing that the Yankees and the Red Sox are in your division and they're going to be in play for this guy, I think that makes it even more difficult for a team to let him get away. In particular, the Orioles let him get away, knowing that he could go north up 95 and end up in one of those two cities and just be a pain in the neck for the next. Well, he was 8 years with the Yankees, so for the next 8 years. In these small ballparks, in the height of the steroid era, and got the job done the way he did, there was no doubt in my mind he was going to eventually make it to the Hall of Fame.
Was his legacy treated a little unfairly? Not obviously now he's a Hall of Famer, but the dispute around him. I saw him in Baltimore every night. I didn't see him in New York every night, right? That was a point when he left, my interest in Oriole baseball, as well as everyone else's, went through the toilet singing. We weren't watching every night our own team, let alone the Yankees in those years. But the Yankees would turn up in the postseason. Obviously, the Red Sox in Tampa factored big toward the end. But you watched him every fifth day. You watched him take the ball as a Yankee. Your thoughts about how his career moved from Baltimore to New York, because it felt like he was more dominant as an Oriole, maybe more appreciated, but he also wasn't in a rotation with Clemens and Pettit and these other guys like he was there.
Yeah, I think you're right. He was number one in Baltimore. He wasn't necessarily number one in New York. They had a tremendous pitching staff over the years, and he was just one of those 4 or 5 pitchers that really stood out. To me, well, it took him to his last year in the major leagues to finally win 20 games. I remember he beat the Red Sox in Boston. Mariano saved the game for him, and that was the only time he ever won 20. But
I remember when Benitez blew one in September that he had a win that was going to be number 20, and he didn't get it because the bullpen blew one, So
is that right?
Well, of course, when you have 19, there are probably 3 or 4 of them, right? But I remember one specifically, and he had to eat that for 6 more months in the off season, saying, 19 wins, stuck on 18, stuck on 19. He had a lot of that going on for years.
Yeah, that was when he won 20, that was his last start of the season. And, of course, I mentioned Mariano saved it for him, so he had the right guy come in to try and save it for him. Mariano didn't blow too many of them.
Well, Game 7 in Arizona was also Messina's to win, too. So that would have been his ring, and that would have been everything. Ken Singleton is our guest, talking Yankees baseball, Orioles baseball, Hall of Fame baseball. And then there's the reality that the pitchers and catchers are reporting, and you're going to be calling 25 games for a team that might win 100 games, and most people in Vegas would say this team's going to lose 100 games. Singy, give me a little bit of thought and optimism in some way, not optimism, realism, that if you weren't going back and calling Yankees games, and if you were in Hunt Valley, and if you were to come down to a couple of games this year, what calls you to the Orioles in the summer of 2019 if you're a guy like me that lives 6 blocks away?
Well, I'd want to see some of the younger players. That's what I would want to see. I want to see them, as the season goes along, improve, get better, get more knowledgeable as to how to play the game at the big league level. I think one thing that I think Oriole fans should remember, I know they lost 115 games last year, but there was a record 8 teams that lost 95 or more games last year in the major leagues. That, to me, that's how the Yankees won 100 and still didn't win the division. That's how the Red Sox won 108 and won the World Series. Because there were so many teams that just couldn't compete at that elite level. I'd like to see a little bit more parity. I know that there just seemed to be too many teams that were faltering during the course of the year, and the Orioles weren't alone. They weren't the only ones. I said 8 teams. That's a record that lost 95 or more games. That sort of thing should not happen. Either some teams aren't trying, or they're trying to get better draft picks, or just trying to keep their payrolls down. But I just think that what I want to see the younger players. I want to see them build the minor leagues. I think they have the right people in place to do it. I think Mike Elias is going to be a tremendous GM. He's young. He's got energy. That's what you're going to need to put this back together.
Singy, you worked through a couple of work stoppages and stops and starts in your career and free agency and Messersmith and all of that stuff. And the last collusion, you were just getting out of the game and starting your career at Channel 13 up on TV Hills. I remember it right around that time.
Yeah.
How do you, in your wisdom now, having been around it longer than I have and lived through all of it, how do you explain the Machado, Bryce Harper? How do you explain the tanking? How do you explain it to this offseason that if you are involved in the business of baseball as an agent or a player, family member, whatever, that this doesn't smell like week-old fish?
Yeah, it's amazing that Harper or Machado have not been signed yet. To me, these are the guys you want to get signed so the logjam breaks and then everybody else gets their due. I think what happens, you get these guys on your team so you can market them to your fans and tell them, look, we've got this guy. You can bring him to your town. You can bring him to your fan fest. That you sign this guy. We're going in the right direction. I know it's going to cost somebody a lot of money, but they'll make it back. As soon as you sign these guys, usually season tickets spike, and people go out and buy tickets because they want to see your new star. Well, this is interesting. I think what is happening is the owners have found a way to glut the market by making the players wait, and then all of a sudden you have guys jumping on one-year deals, maybe 2 at the most. Not many over 3. I haven't seen many deals this winter over three years. And I think players get they get nervous. I remember when I was playing, when I was up for a contract, I wanted it to be done by Christmas. Well, now we're coming into spring training, and there's over 100 free agents that haven't signed yet. So a lot of guys are going to jump on deals that they probably wouldn't have taken way back in around Christmas time. They would have waited more and more and more, and all of a sudden there's a glut on the market. There's some very good players out there that haven't been signed at all.
I've been through these wars, and you've been through these wars. Nothing good comes from this the next time they get together to collectively bargain, correct?
Yeah, something's wrong here. And this is not the first year. It happened last year, too. So this is 2 years of this, and now we're getting closer to a new CBA, collective bargaining agreement. And I I read something today where Justin Verlander, who, one of the greatest pitchers in baseball right now, he says it's broken. The system is broken. It shouldn't be. He basically said what I said. You would want to have a Bryce Harper or Manny Machado already signed, so you could benefit from all the publicity and all the marketing that they would create just having on your team. Well, for some reason that hasn't happened, and it's kind of a. I don't want to use the word collusion. Maybe it's just the owners have figured out a way to make the players wait and accept lesser deals.
Well, the owners have been trying to figure out since the beginning of time how to make more money, right? So that shouldn't come as a shock to anyone. I am a little shocked about the tanking part of it, but I'm not. And look, I've been doing this for 27 years on the radio singing. I lived through the '94 strike as well, so I'm very well versed in how to talk about all of this. But at one point, I really believe that it would have been in the union's best interest to negotiate a really nice salary cap and a really nice floor that everyone. It would have allowed the Milwaukees and the Tampas to have star players in the way that the NFL allows for the Green Bays and the Jacksonvilles to be able to keep their best players. I argue that, and there was no Marvin Miller or Donald Fair who ever would have agreed to anything that looked like certainty.
They wouldn't. You're right. They wouldn't have agreed to that.
And I said long term it was going to make them all more money because the interest level would be up, but I could never make that case. And now 30 years later, I still feel like I was right, but I didn't realize how easily George Steinbrenner would have never tanked, right?
No.
But in the modern era, it's really easy for the Angelos boys to tank and hide for 5 years.
The thing is, if you're going to have a cap at the top, you've got to have a floor at the bottom. You cannot have teams, going under $30 million.
Listen, this is the argument I made when the Padres had their fire sale and the Marlins back in the 90s. I'm talking 20 years ago. That's when I would have said, look, it's time. All these teams are making money. They can all spend $70 or $80 million at least on, and that would have, I think, fixed some things at the bottom. It at least would have gotten 8 to 10 of these bottom teams to spend some money, to have to spend some money,
Well, I have a feeling there is kind of a soft cap with the luxury tax. The teams can't go over certain payroll without paying a penalty. And
it's another drag, though. It's another reason to have them say we don't want to pay a player, right?
Well, that's right. Well, the Yankees got under it last year. The Dodgers, I think, were under. The only team the Red Sox were over, and I think there was one other team. Maybe it was the Dodgers that were over last year, and the Red Sox will be over again this year. And as of right now, I think the Yankees, who reset their tax, their penalty because they were under last year, have gone over right now. So a couple of weeks ago, I sat with Brian Cashman at the writers' dinner in New York, and he was sat next to me on the dais, and he said the Yankees were not going to sign Manny Machado. Now, here's the deal. I think they don't want to sign Manny at what he wants. But if Manny comes down because he feels pressured to get a deal done because nobody's giving him what he wants, if he comes in with a shorter deal, there's going to be a lot of teams jump back in on him. Not only the Yankees, there'll be a lot of teams jump back in on him. But I don't know if that's going to happen or not. This has really been a strange offseason when it comes to two of the best players in the game, and they can't be signed, at least to this point.
Ken Singleton is our guest. He will be calling a very limited number of Yankees baseball games this year and still doing all the great work. Casey Cares, all the cool stuff he does in the community. A Cool Kids campaign, I should say. Excuse me on that. But they're all great charities, and if they call Singy, he says yes because he's helped me. Of course, the last thing I would say for you is all these arguments we've been having about money and free agents and all that. We've been arguing the designated hitter about that long, pal, right? I mean, when you came over from Montreal, you're like, hey, Earl, maybe I get a day a month here again. And then later in your career, it was the way you fed your family. the DH in the National League. Quite frankly, I'm shocked with all of the changes, dogs and cats, American League, National League, interleague play, all wild card, all the things that baseball has adopted that were fought tooth and nail. I'm kind of shocked that the DH hasn't been in the National League for 20 years already, quite frankly.
Yeah, but I think they're getting closer, Nestor. I think that you would agree with me, too, that, now the National League is starting to think about it. And the commissioner mentioned it the other day. I think maybe as early as 2020. 2019, it's not going to happen because National League teams are not built for it, and they're not structured that way. But if they mention sometime during the course of the season that the 2020 season, that the DH is going to be universal, I think you'll see National League rethink the way they make their rosters out. And to me, you should have it. Particularly, I just don't like watching pitchers hit. And I think that, even if they do reach base, they don't run the bases very often. And the Yankees had, do you remember Ching-Ming Wang with the Yankees?
I do, yes.
He was a two-time 19-game winner. In an interleague game, he got to second base, tried to score in a single, hurt his foot, tore something in his foot. He was never the same pitcher again. Last year, Masahiro Tanaka on third base tagged up to score on a fly ball, short fly ball. He had to run pretty hard. He pulled both hamstrings. He was out. He had to go on the injured list or disabled list.
Well, it's even worse when guys, it's not what they do for a living.
Exactly.
So when you have to put a helmet on and go out and face, 93-mile-an-hour cheese, I don't. It's not. I would agree with you. It's not worth watching. After watching it for 50 years. But I also think that there's a level of safety, concern for guys who aren't good at it, who haven't done it. I know we talked about Messina. Messina couldn't wait to get a bat. Messina 3 years when there were rumors of interleague play. Messina and I would be out over a beer after a game in '93, be like, I can't wait. You'll see, I can hit. First time he got a bat, he got a single off Smoltz. He singled off a Hall of Famer.
There are some guys who are decent hitters, but I think you would agree most of them aren't that good.
Oh, yeah.
And especially the American League guys, when they go up there, they're really at a disadvantage. It's even hard for them to bunt runners over. That's just because they don't do it. And they only practice it maybe a week before the interleague games are on the schedule. So that, to me, in a way, that's not fair. I think that any time that they're playing in American League teams in National League Park, National League has the advantage in that regard. To me, a universal DH, I think one reason why the National League has held that on it so long is because in the old days it was more of a veteran position. That's what it was when I was playing, and when I became a DH, it was for a veteran player who was making a pretty good salary. And I think the National League resisted because they wanted to keep the salaries down. Well, now, a lot of teams use the DH differently. They use it in a rotation to give guys, as you mentioned, sort of a half a day off. And they rotate it among their roster. Certain guys will DH. With the Yankees, Stanton will DH most of the time, but then Judge will get a semi-day off or somebody else and become the designated hitter. So there's not really a guy, well, some teams still have it, a guy who is the DH, but teams use it now to give certain players a respite.
Ken Singleton, the Celebrity Classic is June 8th through 10th, 2019. You know I'd sneak that in, Singy. CoolKidsCampaign.org. You can learn more about what Singy's doing. So I guess you won't be calling Yankees games that weekend, and hopefully they give you the Yankees-Orioles games when you're here. Any thoughts on Brandon Hyde? Have you read Astro Ball? Or, you're in a whole different world up in New York than where we are here, but we're just trying to figure this out and trying to figure who the players are going to be, right?
Well, I met Brandon Hyde at the Orioles Christmas party at Camden Yards, and he seemed to be a nice young man, in regards to, early in his career as a manager here. But you got to remember that he was, the bench coach for Joe Madden, so I'm sure he gained some valuable experience there. And you're going to need that type of experience along with Mike Elias, the new GM, to get this thing going in the right direction. If they can avoid losing 100 games this year, that's plus 15 right there. So you got to let the young players play. That's the way I look at it.
One day I'll have a hot dog at a ball game with Ken Singleton. Until then, I will just hang on for great conversations. Singy, take care of yourself. Don't hurt yourself swinging that golf club out there, and we'll definitely stay in touch. We'll look forward to the Cool Kids campaign and all the cool stuff that you're doing here in the area. So keep local and stay warm for the rest of the winter. We'll see you when you get back here for some baseball.
Well, thank you. Like I said, it's a nice time of year to be down in Florida.
I don't know. I'm in Baltimore. See you later.
Okay.
There he goes, the great Ken Singleton, Orioles legend, number 29 in your program, number 1 in your hearts, joining us from Florida, where he's golfing. And I thought he was retired. He told me last year he was retiring, but it's like the Godfather. They get him back in. 25 games. So good for Singy. Always good to have Singy on the program and get his insights into all sorts of things, including Mike Messina and the legend of Frank Robinson. You can find us out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.